The summer of 1999 was supposed to be the beginning of forever for Sarah Michelle Henderson and Robert Bobby Clark. At 24 and 26 respectively, they had just exchanged vows in a small ceremony in Amarillo, Texas, surrounded by family and friends who believed they were witnessing the start of a beautiful love story. Instead, it would become one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries along Interstate 40, a case that would remain cold for 25 years until a single piece of technology would finally shed light on what really happened that fateful July evening. Sarah was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Born and raised in the heart of Texas, she possessed that distinctive southern charm that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes of meeting her. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight like copper wire, and her green eyes sparkled with an infectious optimism that drew people to her like moths to a flame. She worked as an elementary school teacher in Amarillo, where children adored her creative lesson plans and parents respected her dedication to their little ones' education. Sarah had always dreamed of making a difference in young lives. She had graduated from West Texas A&M University with a degree in elementary education, finishing magna cum laude, despite working 2 part-time jobs to pay her way through school. Her childhood had been marked by financial struggles after her father Robert lost his job at the local plant when she was 12. But rather than become bitter, Sarah had developed an even deeper empathy for others facing hardship. Her classroom at Hillcrest Elementary was a wonderland of colorful decorations, reading nooks and interactive learning stations that she had created largely with her own money and countless weekend hours. She was known for staying late to tutor struggling students, for bringing snacks for children who might not have had breakfast, and for the way she could make even the most reluctant learner excited about books and discovery. Sarah's colleagues often marveled at her creativity. She once turned her entire classroom into a pioneer village to teach about westward expansion, complete with a covered wagon made from desks and sheets. Another time, she organized a school-wide poetry contest that drew participation from every grade level, inspiring children who had never written a poem to discover their voices. Parents would request specifically that their children be placed in Miss Henderson's class, knowing that their little ones would not only learn academics, but also kindness, confidence, and joy. Outside of school, Sarah volunteered at the local animal shelter, sang in the church choir, and spent every other weekend helping her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, with grocery shopping and household tasks. She had a gift for remembering details about people's lives, always asking about someone's sick relative, their child's piano recital, or their garden's progress. It was this genuine interest in others that made her so beloved in the community. Bobby Clark had moved to Texas from Oklahoma 3 years prior, chasing a job opportunity at a local manufacturing plant. He was a quiet man, methodical in his approach to life, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work and a gentle smile that had captured Sarah's heart at a church social in the spring of 1998. Their courtship had been traditional, filled with Sunday dinners at Sarah's family home, long walks through Palo Duro Canyon, and conversations that stretched late into the night about their dreams for the future. Bobby's journey to Texas had been born out of necessity and hope. After his parents died in a car accident in 1995, he had struggled to find his footing in the small Oklahoma town where he'd grown up. The grief had been overwhelming, and the reminders of his loss seemed to lurk around every corner. When a friend mentioned job openings at a manufacturing plant in Amarillo, Bobby saw it as an opportunity for a fresh start. The work at Hartwell Manufacturing suited him perfectly. Bobby had always been good with his hands, able to fix almost anything and possessing an intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems worked. His supervisors quickly recognized his reliability and attention to detail, promoting him to floor supervisor within 18 months of his arrival. His coworkers respected him for his fairness and his willingness to stay late to help solve problems or train new employees. Bobby lived simply, renting a small apartment near the plant and driving a used pickup truck that he maintained meticulously. He sent money every month to his late parents' church in Oklahoma, ensuring that the youth program his mother had started would continue in their memory. He rarely spoke about his past, but those who got to know him understood that his quiet demeanor masked both deep loss and profound strength. When he met Sarah at the church social, Bobby had been attending services for only a few months, drawn more by the sense of community than by deep religious conviction. Sarah had been helping with the refreshment table, laughing with a group of children who were clearly enchanted by her animated storytelling. When she smiled at him across the room and waved him over to try her famous chocolate chip cookies, Bobby felt something he hadn't experienced since his parents' passing, the possibility of belonging somewhere again. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours, continuing long after the social had officially ended and the church hall had emptied around them. Sarah's warmth and genuine interest in others drew out stories that Bobby hadn't shared with anyone since moving to Texas. He told her about his parents, about his work, about his dream of someday owning a small piece of land where he could build things with his hands and maybe raise a family. Sarah listened with the kind of attention that made him feel truly heard for the first time in years. The wedding ceremony took place on July 10, 1999, at the First Baptist Church of Amarillo. Sarah wore her grandmother's pearl necklace and a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, with homemade decorations and a potluck dinner that showcased the best of Texas hospitality. By all accounts, it was a perfect day, filled with laughter, dancing, and the kind of joy that makes even strangers smile when they witness it. The months leading up to the wedding had been a whirlwind of planning on a tight budget, but Sarah approached every decision with the same creativity and enthusiasm she brought to her classroom. She and her mother Linda had spent weekends scouring thrift stores and estate sales for vintage decorations, transforming the church fellowship hall into a romantic space with soft lighting, mason jar centerpieces filled with wildflowers, and handmade bunting that Sarah had sewn herself during quiet evenings. Bobby had insisted on paying for the flowers, surprising Sarah with her favorite white roses mixed with baby's breath, arranged by a local florist who had been one of Sarah's former students' mothers. The woman had offered a significant discount when she learned who the bride was, saying that Miss Henderson had been the teacher who finally helped her dyslexic son discover his love of reading. The wedding dress itself carried deep family significance. Sarah's mother had worn it in 1971, and before that it had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, who had been married in it during the Depression era of 1936. Linda had carefully preserved the dress over the years, and with some minor alterations by a seamstress friend, it fit Sarah perfectly. The pearl necklace had been her grandmother's wedding gift from her grandfather, a simple strand that had been in the family for 3 generations. Bobby's best man was his co-worker and friend, Michael Torres, who had become like a brother to him during his years in Texas. Michael later recalled that Bobby had been nervous but radiantly happy on the morning of the wedding, spending extra time polishing his shoes and adjusting his tie in the mirror of the church's small preparation room. Bobby had no family members present, but Sarah's family had embraced him so completely that he felt surrounded by love and support. The ceremony itself was traditional but personal. Pastor Williams, who had counseled the couple through their engagement, spoke about the strength that comes from 2 people choosing to build a life together despite the uncertainties of the world. Sarah and Bobby had written their own vows, though they were simple and spoken from the heart rather than elaborate declarations. Bobby promised to be Sarah's partner in all of life's adventures, while Sarah vowed to support Bobby's dreams and help him build the future they had planned together. The reception that followed showcased the tight-knit nature of the Amarillo community that had embraced both Sarah and Bobby. The potluck dinner featured dishes that reflected the diverse heritage of West Texas, from Mrs. Martinez's famous tamales to the Henderson family's traditional cornbread stuffing. Bobby's co-workers had pooled their money to buy the couple a new set of tools, knowing Bobby's love of building and fixing things, while Sarah's fellow teachers had created a scrapbook filled with photos and notes from students, past and present. The evening was filled with the kind of moments that become treasured memories. Sarah's father Robert overcome with emotion as he walked his daughter down the aisle, Linda wiping away tears as she watched her daughter dance with her new husband, and the spontaneous moment when the entire reception joined in singing Amazing Grace as Sarah's choir director played the piano. As the reception wound down around 9 o'clock, the couple made their rounds to thank everyone for coming and to say their goodbyes. Sarah hugged each of her students' parents who had attended, laughing when little Tommy Anderson, one of her second graders, presented her with a drawing he had made of her and Bobby, standing next to a house with a white picket fence. Bobby shook hands with his coworkers and received backslaps and good-natured advice about married life from men who had become his closest friends in Texas. The plan was simple. After the reception ended around 9 in the evening, the newlyweds would drive Bobby's 1997 Ford pickup truck to Santa Fe, New Mexico, for a modest honeymoon. They had booked a small bed and breakfast in the historic district, nothing fancy, but it was what they could afford on their combined modest salaries. The drive would take them west on Interstate 40, a route Bobby had traveled several times for work. It should have been a straightforward journey of about 3.5 hours, arriving in Santa Fe by midnight or shortly after. Sarah's younger sister, Jennifer, later recalled helping her pack the night before the wedding. Sarah had been excited about the trip, chattering about the art galleries they planned to visit, and the Mexican food she was eager to try. She packed carefully, folding each item with the precision of someone who wanted everything to be perfect for her first trip as a married woman. Her suitcase contained 3 sundresses, comfortable walking shoes, a camera with several rolls of film, and a small journal where she planned to record memories of their honeymoon. The last confirmed sighting of the couple was at the reception. Multiple witnesses remembered seeing them leave the church around 9:15, with Sarah's wedding dress carefully hung in a garment bag in the back seat of the truck, and her going-away outfit a simple blue summer dress that brought out her eyes. Bobby had changed into jeans and a button-down shirt, looking relaxed and happy as he helped his new wife into the passenger seat of the truck. What happened next would puzzle investigators for decades. At approximately 11:30 that night, a trucker named William Big Bill Morrison was heading east on Interstate 40, about 60 miles west of Amarillo, when he spotted what appeared to be a vehicle on the shoulder of the highway. Morrison, a veteran driver with over 20 years of experience on America's highways, had seen enough breakdowns and accidents to know when something didn't look right. The truck was sitting at an odd angle, not quite parallel to the road as most broken-down vehicles would be positioned. The driver's door was open, hanging into the travel lane, which Morrison found particularly strange because any experienced driver would know better than to create such a hazard. More troubling still, the headlights were on, but there was no sign of anyone near the vehicle. Morrison pulled over and activated his emergency flashers before approaching the truck. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Ford pickup was indeed Bobby's truck, identifiable by the Texas license plates and a small dent in the tailgate that Bobby's friends would later confirm. The keys were in the ignition. The engine was running and Sarah's purse was on the passenger seat, her wallet still inside with $47 in cash and all her identification. But Bobby and Sarah were nowhere to be found. Morrison immediately radioed for help, and within 30 minutes the scene was swarming with state troopers and local law enforcement. The initial assessment was that the couple had simply walked away from their vehicle, perhaps to get help, or because they had been picked up by a good Samaritan. It wasn't uncommon for people to abandon their vehicles temporarily when they broke down in remote areas. However, as the hours passed and daylight revealed more details, the situation became increasingly ominous. There were no mechanical problems with the truck. The engine ran smoothly, all fluids were at proper levels, and there were no signs of impact or damage beyond the small dent that had been there previously. More puzzling was the fact that Bobby's wallet was missing, while Sarah's purse remained untouched. The ground around the vehicle told a confusing story. There were footprints in the soft shoulder dirt, but they led in multiple directions and were difficult to interpret due to the number of people who had walked around the scene before investigators could properly document it. Some prints appeared to head toward the roadway, others toward the nearby fence line that separated the highway from open ranch land. Detective Maria Santos of the Texas Department of Public Safety was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. Santos, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for thoroughness and intuition, arrived at the scene just after dawn on July 11th. What she observed would shape her approach to the investigation for years to come. The positioning of the vehicle bothered her immediately. The truck was angled in such a way that suggested it had either been moved after stopping or had been placed there deliberately. The open driver's door created a dangerous situation that no rational person would have left unaddressed, especially someone like Bobby, who was known for his cautious nature and attention to detail. More intriguing was the condition of Sarah's belongings. Her purse was open, but nothing appeared to be missing. Her wedding ring was still on her finger when she left the reception, according to witnesses, but it was found on the dashboard of the truck, carefully placed rather than dropped or lost. The garment bag containing her wedding dress was still hanging neatly in the back seat, undisturbed. The investigation expanded rapidly. Search and rescue teams combed the area for miles in every direction, using dogs, helicopters, and volunteers from the local community. Posters with Bobby and Sarah's photographs appeared throughout Texas and New Mexico. The case received significant media attention, particularly because of the romantic tragedy of newlyweds vanishing on their way to their honeymoon. The first 48 hours of the investigation were crucial, and Detective Santos coordinated efforts involving multiple agencies and hundreds of volunteers. The Texas Rangers were called in to assist, bringing additional resources and expertise in missing persons cases. The FBI opened a preliminary investigation, though they would not take primary jurisdiction unless evidence emerged of interstate criminal activity. Search teams began their work at first light on July 11th, focusing initially on the immediate area around where the truck had been found. Trained search and rescue dogs were brought in from 3 different counties, each team specializing in different aspects of tracking. Some dogs were trained for live human scent, others for cadaver detection, and still others for following specific scent trails. The results were puzzling and contradictory. One team's dog seemed to pick up a trail leading north from the truck, toward a fence line that separated the highway from ranch land. The trail led approximately 200 yards before the dogs lost the scent at a dirt road that ran parallel to the highway. Other dogs indicated scent traces leading south and east, but these trails also ended abruptly without clear explanation. Helicopter searches covered a radius of 20 miles around the abandoned truck, focusing on areas where someone might take captives or dispose of evidence. Pilots and observers looked for disturbed earth, abandoned vehicles, clothing, or any other signs that might indicate what had happened to the missing couple. The terrain was challenging, with deep arroyos, dense mesquite thickets, and countless gullies where evidence could easily be hidden. The volunteer effort was extraordinary. Within 24 hours of the disappearance becoming public knowledge, over 300 people had shown up to help with the search. They included Sarah's fellow teachers and their families, Bobby's co-workers from the manufacturing plant, members of both their churches, and complete strangers who were moved by the story of the missing newlyweds. The volunteers were organized into teams of 20, each led by an experienced search and rescue coordinator. They walked in grid patterns across miles of rough terrain, looking for anything that might provide a clue about Bobby and Sarah's fate. The search was made more difficult by the summer heat, which reached over 100 degrees during the day, forcing teams to begin before dawn and work in shorter shifts. Local ranchers opened their gates and provided access to thousands of acres of private land, understanding that time was critical in a missing persons case. Some even provided water and shade for search teams working on their property, while others used their own knowledge of the local terrain to suggest areas that might be worth examining. The media attention brought both benefits and challenges to the investigation. Television stations from Amarillo, Lubbock, and Albuquerque covered the story extensively, broadcasting the couple's photographs and asking for any information from the public. The coverage generated hundreds of tips and potential sightings, but each lead had to be investigated thoroughly, stretching the resources of the investigating agencies. Some of the tips seemed promising initially, but led nowhere. A gas station attendant in Tucumcari, New Mexico, reported seeing a couple matching Bobby and Sarah's description around midnight on July 10th, but security camera footage from the station was too poor quality to confirm the identification. A motel clerk in Santa Rosa claimed that a man and woman had checked in late on July 10th, but had left early the next morning without explanation. But again, the description was too vague to be conclusive. Other tips revealed the challenges of investigating a high-profile case. Several people called to report seeing the couple in various locations across Texas and New Mexico, but when investigators followed up, it became clear that these were cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking, rather than genuine sightings. The investigation also revealed how difficult it was to establish a clear timeline of the couple's movements after they left the wedding reception. While multiple witnesses had seen them leave the church around 9:15, no one could definitively say they had seen the couple or their truck on Interstate 40 that night. This gap in confirmed sightings meant that investigators had to consider the possibility that something had happened to Bobby and Sarah, much closer to Amarillo than originally believed. Detective Santos and her team spent countless hours interviewing anyone who might have relevant information. They spoke with every gas station attendant, restaurant worker, and motel clerk along the route the couple would have taken to Santa Fe. They interviewed truck drivers who had been on Interstate 40 that night, asking about anything unusual they might have seen or heard on their CB radios. The technical aspects of the investigation were equally thorough. The abandoned truck was processed by crime scene technicians who documented every surface for fingerprints, every fabric for fiber evidence, and every surface for trace materials that might indicate contact with another person or vehicle. The truck's interior was carefully photographed and examined under different types of lighting to reveal details that might not be visible to the naked eye. Forensic specialists also examined the truck's mechanical systems to determine if it had experienced any problems that might have forced Bobby and Sarah to stop. They checked the engine, transmission, electrical system, and tires, finding everything in good working order. The gas tank was nearly full, indicating that the couple had not stopped for fuel, and there were no signs of overheating or other mechanical issues that might have caused a breakdown. Family members were interviewed extensively. Sarah's parents, Robert and Linda Henderson, were devastated but cooperative. They insisted that their daughter had never mentioned any problems in her relationship with Bobby, and that she had been genuinely excited about the marriage and their future together. Bobby's family, though less numerous since his parents had passed away several years earlier, echoed similar sentiments about his character and his love for Sarah. Friends and co-workers painted a picture of a normal couple with typical hopes and dreams. There were no hidden debts, no secret relationships, no indication of domestic troubles or mental health issues. Both Bobby and Sarah were described as responsible, reliable people who wouldn't simply walk away from their lives without explanation. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to explore more sinister possibilities. Detective Santos worked with the FBI to examine potential connections to other unsolved cases along Interstate 40. The highway had unfortunately been the scene of several disappearances and violent crimes over the years, earning it an unofficial reputation as one of America's most dangerous roadways. One theory that gained traction was that the couple had been the victims of a random crime, perhaps pulled over by someone impersonating a law enforcement officer, or approached by individuals with bad intentions while their truck was stopped for some innocent reason. This scenario could explain why the vehicle appeared to be positioned deliberately, and why Bobby's wallet was missing while Sarah's purse remained. Another possibility was that Bobby himself was responsible for Sarah's disappearance, though this theory was less popular among investigators who had gotten to know the couple's friends and family. The evidence didn't support a scenario where Bobby had harmed Sarah and then disappeared himself, particularly given his lack of resources and connections outside of Texas. A more exotic theory suggested that the couple had staged their own disappearance, perhaps to escape some unknown pressure or threat. However, this possibility seemed unlikely given their limited finances, their strong ties to the community, and the complete absence of any evidence that they had been planning such a move. As 1999 turned into 2000, the case gradually faded from public attention, though it never left the minds of those directly affected. Detective Santos continued to work the case whenever new leads emerged, but those became increasingly rare as time passed. The file remained open, but it was essentially cold. Sarah's parents never stopped hoping for answers. Every year on July 10th, they would place flowers at the spot where the truck had been found, a private ritual that helped them maintain connection to their daughter. They never remarried Sarah and Bobby in their hearts, always holding on to the possibility that somehow, someday, their daughter might return. The 20th anniversary of the disappearance in 2019 brought renewed media attention and a fresh review of the evidence by cold case specialists. Modern forensic techniques were applied to physical evidence that had been preserved, but DNA analysis and advanced fingerprinting yielded no new leads. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. Then in March of 2024, something extraordinary happened. Harold Mitchell was a retired mechanic living in Tucumcari, New Mexico, who had spent his career working on trucks and heavy equipment. At 73 years old, he was cleaning out his garage to prepare for a move to a retirement community when he discovered something that had been sitting in a cardboard box for over 2 decades. In 1999, Harold had briefly worked for a small trucking company that specialized in hauling equipment across the Southwest. The company had installed primitive dash cameras in some of their vehicles as an early experiment in driver safety monitoring, long before such technology became standard. When the company went out of business in 2000, Harold had taken home several pieces of equipment, including a dash camera unit and its associated storage device. The box had been forgotten in the garage until Harold's systematic cleaning brought it to light. Curious about whether the old equipment still functioned, he took it to his neighbor, a retired electronics technician named Dave Wilson, who had experience with various types of recording equipment. Wilson managed to extract data from the storage device, discovering that it contained footage from July 10th and 11th, 1999. Most of the recording showed routine highway driving, but one segment captured something that would send shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across 2 states. The timestamp on the recording showed 11:47 p.m. on July 10th, 1999. The truck equipped with the dash camera was traveling east on Interstate 40, and the footage clearly showed a pickup truck on the shoulder ahead, matching the description of Bobby's Ford. But this wasn't the empty, abandoned vehicle that Big Bill Morrison would discover 43 minutes later. The footage showed 2 figures near the truck, illuminated by the headlights of the approaching vehicle. One person appeared to be a woman in light-colored clothing, consistent with Sarah's description. The other was a man, taller and heavier than Bobby, wearing what appeared to be a uniform or official-looking clothing. As the truck with the dash camera passed the scene, the recording captured the most crucial seconds of evidence. The uniformed figure was clearly gesturing toward a second vehicle, a dark-colored sedan or SUV that was parked further ahead on the shoulder, barely visible in the footage. The woman appeared to be walking toward this second vehicle, not under obvious duress, but the body language suggested uncertainty or reluctance. The recording was too brief and the lighting too poor to capture faces or license plates, but it provided the first concrete evidence of what had happened to Bobby and Sarah. They had not simply vanished into thin air. They had encountered someone on that remote stretch of highway, someone who had convinced them to leave their truck and get into another vehicle. Harold Mitchell immediately contacted the Texas Department of Public Safety, and within hours the footage was in the hands of Detective Santos, who was still working cold cases despite being near retirement. Santos watched the recording dozens of times, analyzing every frame with the help of FBI video specialists and modern enhancement technology. The enhanced footage revealed additional details that would prove crucial to understanding the case. The uniformed figure wore what appeared to be a badge or some type of official insignia, supporting the theory that Bobby and Sarah had been approached by someone impersonating a law enforcement officer. The second vehicle appeared to be a dark-colored SUV or large sedan, consistent with the type of unmarked police vehicles commonly used in the late 1990s. More importantly, the footage allowed investigators to narrow down the timeline significantly. The recording showed the encounter in progress at 11:47 p.m., and Big Bill Morrison discovered the abandoned truck at 11:30 p.m. This meant that whatever happened to Bobby and Sarah occurred in a very specific 17-minute window. The discovery of the dash camera footage breathed new life into the investigation. Detective Santos, now working with a joint task force that included FBI specialists and investigators from New Mexico, began re-examining every aspect of the case with this new evidence in mind. One of the first steps was to research law enforcement personnel who had been working in the area on the night of July 10, 1999. This was a painstaking process that involved contacting multiple agencies and reviewing duty rosters from 25 years ago. Most of the officers from that era had retired or moved on to other careers, but investigators were able to account for the whereabouts of legitimate law enforcement personnel during the relevant time period. This process led to a disturbing discovery. There had been reports in 1999 and 2000 of someone impersonating a police officer along various stretches of Interstate 40, pulling over unsuspecting motorists and robbing them. These incidents had occurred in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, suggesting a criminal who was mobile and familiar with the highway system. The reports described a man in his 30s or 40s who drove an unmarked dark vehicle equipped with flashing lights and police radio equipment. He would approach vehicles that were stopped or traveling slowly, present some type of badge or identification, and convince drivers to get out of their cars. In most cases, he simply robbed them and left them stranded, but there were a few instances where the victims described being forced to drive to remote locations before being abandoned. None of these incidents had been directly connected to Bobby and Sarah's disappearance in 1999, partly because the couple had vanished completely, rather than being found robbed and stranded like the other victims. However, the dash camera footage suggested that their encounter might have followed a similar pattern, with more serious consequences. The task force began working with a criminal profiler to develop a more detailed understanding of the perpetrator. The profile suggested someone with knowledge of law enforcement procedures, possibly a former police officer or security guard, who had developed a sophisticated method for targeting vulnerable motorists. The fact that he operated along a specific highway corridor indicated familiarity with the area and possibly a base of operations somewhere along the route. The investigation expanded to include a comprehensive review of similar cases across the Southwest. What emerged was a pattern of disappearances and unsolved crimes that had occurred along Interstate 40 and connecting highways throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. While not all of these cases could be definitively linked, there were enough similarities to suggest the possibility of a serial predator who had been operating undetected for years. One case that stood out occurred in October 1999. Just 3 months after Bobby and Sarah's disappearance. A young couple from Colorado had been found deceased in a remote area of New Mexico, approximately 50 miles south of Interstate 40. They had been shot, and their rental car had been discovered abandoned on the highway. The case had been classified as a robbery gone wrong, but the task force began to wonder if there might be a connection. As the investigation progressed, advances in forensic technology allowed for new analysis of physical evidence from the original scene. Soil samples from around Bobby's truck were re-examined using modern techniques, revealing trace elements that suggested the presence of a second vehicle in addition to the truck itself. This finding corroborated the dash camera footage and provided additional confirmation that Bobby and Sarah had indeed encountered someone else on that remote stretch of highway. The tire impressions that had been documented in 1999 were also reanalyzed. Digital enhancement revealed tread patterns consistent with law enforcement vehicles from that era, specifically the type of tires commonly used on unmarked police cars and government vehicles. This detail, combined with the uniformed figure visible in the dash camera footage, strengthened the theory that the perpetrator had been impersonating a law enforcement officer. Media coverage of the new developments brought forward several individuals who had never previously contacted authorities, but who had information relevant to the case. One particularly significant witness was a retired truck driver named Martin Rodriguez, who had been traveling west on Interstate 40 on the night of July 10, 1999. Rodriguez recalled seeing what he described as a police stop in progress around 11:30 p.m., approximately 10 miles west of where Bobby's truck was later found. He had observed a dark SUV with flashing lights parked behind what appeared to be a pickup truck, with several figures visible near the vehicles. At the time, he had assumed it was a routine traffic stop and had continued on his route without giving it much thought. Rodriguez's testimony was significant because it suggested that the encounter between Bobby, Sarah, and their abductor had begun earlier and possibly at a different location than originally believed. This expanded the potential crime scene and provided investigators with additional areas to search for evidence. The investigation also benefited from advances in database technology and information sharing between law enforcement agencies. A comprehensive search of criminal records from the late 1990s identified several individuals who had been arrested for impersonating law enforcement officers during that time period. While most of these cases involved minor fraud or harassment charges, they provided starting points for deeper investigation. One name that emerged from this process was particularly intriguing. Thomas Edward Hartley had been arrested in Oklahoma in 2001 for impersonating a police officer and robbing motorists along various highways. His method of operation closely matched the incidents that had been reported along Interstate 40, and his physical description was consistent with witness accounts of the false police officer. Thomas Edward Hartley was a man whose life had been marked by violence, deception, and an obsession with authority that would ultimately lead him down a path of increasingly serious crimes. Born in 1962 in a small town outside of Oklahoma City, Hartley had grown up in a household dominated by an abusive father who had served as a small-town police officer before being dismissed for excessive force complaints. Hartley's childhood was characterized by his father's unpredictable rages and his obsession with law enforcement authority. The elder Hartley would regale his son with stories of the power that came with wearing a badge, the respect that people showed to officers, and the ability to control situations through intimidation and force. Young Thomas absorbed these lessons, developing a warped understanding of authority that would shape his entire adult life. After barely graduating from high school, Hartley attempted to follow in his father's footsteps by applying to police academies in Oklahoma and Texas. However, his psychological evaluations revealed concerning patterns of aggressive behavior and an unhealthy fascination with power and control. He was rejected by every law enforcement agency he approached, a series of failures that only deepened his resentment toward society and his determination to obtain the authority he felt he deserved. Unable to become a legitimate police officer, Hartley turned to security work, taking positions with various companies throughout the Southwest during the 1980s and early 1990s. His employers consistently reported similar problems: excessive use of force, inappropriate behavior toward female employees and customers, and a tendency to exceed his authority in dealing with minor infractions. He was fired from at least 7 different security positions between 1985 and 1995, each dismissal making him more bitter and more convinced that the world was conspiring against him. During this period, Hartley began experimenting with impersonating law enforcement officers. Initially, these incidents were relatively minor, using fake police identification to get discounts at restaurants, claiming to be an officer to impress women at bars, or flashing a badge to avoid traffic tickets. However, as his legitimate employment opportunities dwindled, these impersonations became more elaborate and more criminal in nature. By the mid-1990s, Hartley had assembled an impressive collection of law enforcement equipment. He purchased decommissioned police vehicles at auctions, installing emergency lights and radio equipment to make them appear authentic. He collected badges, uniforms, and other official paraphernalia through various means, some purchased legally at surplus stores, others stolen from actual police departments during burglaries that he carefully planned and executed. Hartley's first confirmed robbery while impersonating a police officer occurred in 1997 near Tulsa, Oklahoma. He had pulled over a young woman traveling alone, claiming that her vehicle matched the description of one used in a robbery. After convincing her to get out of her car for a safety search, he robbed her of her purse and jewelry before fleeing the scene. The victim's description of a professional-appearing officer with authentic-looking equipment initially led investigators to suspect that the crime had been committed by an actual police officer gone rogue. This initial success emboldened Hartley to expand his operations. He began targeting isolated stretches of highway, where legitimate police presence was minimal, and where he could operate without fear of encountering actual law enforcement officers. His preferred hunting grounds included Interstate 40 through Texas and New Mexico, Highway 87 through the Texas Panhandle, and various state highways in rural Oklahoma. Hartley's methods became increasingly sophisticated over time. He studied police procedures and protocols, learning enough legitimate law enforcement language and techniques to convincingly portray himself as an officer. He monitored police radio frequencies to avoid areas where real officers were working, and he carefully selected his victims based on their vulnerability and isolation. The profile that emerged from studying Hartley's criminal progression painted a picture of a dangerous predator who combined intelligence, planning, and complete lack of empathy for his victims. Unlike many criminals who acted impulsively, Hartley was methodical in his approach, sometimes spending weeks observing potential hunting grounds before acting. He kept detailed notes about highway traffic patterns, police patrol schedules, and the types of vehicles that traveled specific routes during different times of day and night. By 1999, Hartley had committed at least 12 confirmed robberies using his false police officer persona, though investigators suspected the actual number was much higher. His victims included couples traveling to vacation destinations, business travelers on remote highways, and individuals whose vehicles had broken down in isolated areas. In most cases, he simply robbed his victims and left them stranded, but there were indications that his crimes were escalating in violence and scope. The investigation into Hartley's background revealed disturbing evidence of his increasing boldness and cruelty. Several victims reported that he had seemed to enjoy their fear and confusion, taking time to psychologically torment them, even after obtaining their money and valuables. He would often lecture his victims about highway safety, or make cryptic comments about how dangerous it was to trust strangers, as if he were performing some kind of twisted public service. More ominously, investigators found evidence that Hartley had been escalating toward more serious crimes. Among his possessions were newspaper clippings about unsolved disappearances and violent crimes along various highways, some dating back to the early 1990s. He had highlighted certain details in these articles and had made handwritten notes in the margins, suggesting that he was studying other criminals' methods or possibly revisiting his own past crimes. A search of Hartley's various residences over the years revealed a disturbing pattern of obsession with law enforcement and violence. He had collected hundreds of magazines and books about police procedures, criminal investigation techniques, and forensic science. He possessed detailed maps of highway systems throughout the Southwest, with various locations marked in different colored inks that corresponded to dates in a coded journal that investigators were still working to decipher at the time of the breakthrough in Bobby and Sarah's case. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of what appeared to be trophies from his crimes. In addition to Sarah's wedding ring, investigators found jewelry, identification cards, and personal items that they were working to connect with other unsolved cases. Each item was carefully preserved and cataloged, suggesting that Hartley derived psychological satisfaction from revisiting his crimes through these mementos. The psychological profile compiled by FBI behavioral specialists described Hartley as a classic example of a serial predator who used his false authority to satisfy both financial and psychological needs. His choice to impersonate police officers was not random, but reflected deep-seated issues with authority, control, and his need to dominate others. The escalation in his crime suggested that simple robbery was no longer sufficient to satisfy his psychological needs, leading to more violent outcomes for his victims. Hartley had died in 2018 while serving a sentence for unrelated charges, but investigators were able to access his possessions and records from that period. Among his belongings were several items that raised immediate red flags. Police equipment that had never been accounted for, including badges, radios, and emergency lights, as well as detailed maps of highways throughout Texas and New Mexico, with various locations marked. More significantly, investigators found a small metal container among Hartley's possessions that contained what appeared to be personal items taken from victims. Among these items was a simple gold wedding band inscribed with the words, "Sarah and Bobby Forever, July 10, 1999. The discovery of Sarah's wedding ring provided the most concrete physical evidence linking Hartley to the couple's disappearance. DNA analysis of the ring confirmed that it had indeed belonged to Sarah, and no other explanation could account for how it had come to be in Hartley's possession. With this evidence, investigators were able to build a comprehensive theory of what had happened to Bobby and Sarah on that July night in 1999. According to this reconstruction, the couple had been traveling west on Interstate 40 when they were pulled over by Hartley, who was impersonating a police officer. Using his false authority and official-looking equipment, he had convinced them to leave their truck and get into his vehicle, possibly claiming that their truck had been involved in some type of incident or that they needed to accompany him for questioning. The dash camera footage had captured the moment when Hartley was directing Sarah toward his vehicle, while Bobby was presumably already in custody. What happened next remained unclear, but investigators believed that Hartley had taken the couple to a remote location where he robbed and ultimately ended their lives, disposing of their remains in an area that had not yet been discovered despite extensive searches. The revelation that Bobby and Sarah had likely been victims of a serial predator brought both closure and renewed heartbreak to their families. After 25 years of uncertainty, there was finally an explanation for their disappearance, but it came with the grim confirmation that they had indeed lost their lives that night. Sarah's parents, now in their 70s, expressed mixed emotions about the breakthrough in the case. While they were grateful to finally have answers, they struggled with the knowledge that their daughter and son-in-law had suffered at the hands of a violent criminal. The discovery also meant letting go of the small hope they had maintained for 25 years that somehow, Sarah might still be alive. Robert Henderson, Sarah's father, had never fully recovered from his daughter's disappearance. A man who had worked hard his entire life to provide for his family, he was devastated by his inability to protect Sarah when she needed him most. In the years following the disappearance, Robert had spent countless hours driving the highways between Amarillo and Santa Fe, stopping at every gas station, restaurant, and motel to show Sarah and Bobby's photographs and ask if anyone remembered seeing them. The searching had become an obsession that worried his wife Linda and younger daughter Jennifer. Robert would take vacation days from his job at the grain elevator to make these trips, sometimes staying away for entire weekends, as he systematically covered every possible route the couple might have taken. He carried detailed maps marked with locations he had already searched, methodically crossing off possibilities as he found no trace of his daughter and son-in-law. Linda Henderson had channeled her grief differently, throwing herself into community service and advocacy for missing persons' families. She had helped establish a support group for families dealing with unexplained disappearances, providing comfort and practical assistance to others facing similar situations. The group met monthly at the same church where Sarah and Bobby had been married, and Linda's strength and compassion had helped dozens of families navigate the unique challenges of living with uncertainty. Jennifer, Sarah's younger sister, had been 21 when her sister disappeared, just beginning her own adult life. The loss had profound effects on her relationships and life choices, making her intensely protective of those she loved and deeply suspicious of strangers. She had considered becoming a police officer or FBI agent to help solve cases like her sister's, but ultimately decided that she couldn't emotionally handle such work on a daily basis. Instead, Jennifer had become a counselor specializing in trauma and grief, inspired by her own experience and her desire to help others process loss and uncertainty. She often told her clients that while her sister's case had taken 25 years to solve, the experience had taught her that answers sometimes come when we least expect them, and that hope, even when it seems irrational, can be a powerful force for healing. The impact on Bobby's co-workers at Hartwell Manufacturing had been significant as well. Michael Torres, who had served as Bobby's best man, had never forgiven himself for not insisting on following the couple to New Mexico, or at least checking on them the next day. Michael had taken over Bobby's responsibilities at the plant and had been instrumental in establishing a scholarship fund in Bobby and Sarah's names for local students pursuing careers in education or skilled trades. The scholarship fund had grown over the years, supported by annual fundraising events and donations from community members who remembered the couple. By 2024, it had helped over 40 students pursue higher education, creating a lasting legacy from the tragedy. Each scholarship recipient received not only financial assistance, but also a brief biography of Bobby and Sarah, ensuring that their memory would continue to inspire future generations. Sarah's former students, now adults with children of their own, had never forgotten their beloved teacher. Many of them had named their own daughters Sarah in her honor, and several had become teachers themselves, inspired by her example. The elementary school where she had taught had dedicated a library reading garden in her memory, with a bronze plaque that read, "Sarah Henderson Clark. She taught us that every story matters and that learning never ends." The annual memorial service that had been held every July 10th since 1999 had evolved into a community celebration of life that drew hundreds of participants. The event included readings of poems and essays written by Sarah's former students, performances by the church choir that she had loved, and displays of charitable work done in Bobby and Sarah's memory. Local law enforcement officers always attended, both to honor the couple's memory and to remind the community of the importance of highway safety. Pastor Williams, who had officiated at Bobby and Sarah's wedding and had conducted memorial services for them for over 2 decades, often spoke about how the couple's story had affected his own ministry. He had seen firsthand how tragedy could either destroy faith or deepen it, and he had watched the Henderson family choose hope and service over bitterness and despair. Their example had influenced his counseling of other families facing loss, and he credited them with teaching him that sometimes the most powerful sermons are lived rather than preached. The broader Amarillo community had also been changed by the case. The disappearance had served as a wake-up call about the dangers that could lurk on seemingly safe highways, leading to increased awareness about travel safety and the importance of staying in contact with family members during trips. Local law enforcement agencies had implemented new protocols for investigating missing persons cases, partly inspired by lessons learned from Bobby and Sarah's disappearance. The case had also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining hope in cold cases. Detective Santos had often spoken at law enforcement conferences about the investigation, emphasizing how a single piece of overlooked evidence could break open a case decades later. Her presentation included the dash camera footage that had finally solved the mystery, serving as a powerful reminder to investigators never to give up on finding the truth. Local media had played a crucial role in keeping the case alive in public memory. Every anniversary of the disappearance, newspapers and television stations would run updates on the investigation, ensuring that new residents were aware of the case and that potential witnesses or evidence sources might still come forward. This consistent coverage had been instrumental in the eventual discovery of the dash camera footage, as it prompted Harold Mitchell to contact authorities when he found the old equipment. The ripple effects of Bobby and Sarah's story extended far beyond Amarillo. Their case had been featured in several true crime documentaries and podcasts, reaching national audiences and inspiring other cold case investigations. The combination of romance, mystery, and ultimate resolution made their story particularly compelling to audiences, but more importantly, it served as an example of how persistence and new technology could bring closure to seemingly hopeless cases. The psychological impact on the community had been profound and lasting. Many residents reported that the case had changed how they thought about personal safety and the vulnerability of ordinary people to random violence. Parents became more protective of their adult children, insisting on more frequent communication during travel and being more aware of potential dangers on isolated highways. At the same time, the community's response to the tragedy had demonstrated the best of human nature. The massive volunteer search effort, the ongoing support for the families, and the various memorial projects showed how ordinary people could come together in the face of evil to support those who were suffering and to ensure that victims were not forgotten. The local churches had also been deeply affected by the case. Many congregations had implemented new programs focused on supporting families in crisis, providing both immediate practical assistance and long-term emotional support. The interfaith cooperation that had developed during the search for Bobby and Sarah had continued over the years, creating stronger bonds between different religious communities in Amarillo. High school counselors and college advisors throughout the region began using Bobby and Sarah's story as a teaching tool, helping young people understand the importance of travel safety, staying connected with family, and trusting their instincts when something didn't feel right. The case became part of informal safety education curricula, passed down from older students to younger ones and from parents to children. The case prompted a comprehensive review of similar unsolved disappearances along Interstate 40 and other major highways. Investigators identified at least 6 other cases that showed similarities to Bobby and Sarah's disappearance, suggesting that Hartley might have been responsible for multiple crimes over a period of several years. The most significant of these connected cases involved the Martinez family from Colorado Springs, who had disappeared in October 1998 while traveling to a family reunion in Albuquerque. Carlos Martinez, 32, his wife Elena, 29, and their 8-year-old daughter Sophia had left Colorado on a Friday afternoon, planning to arrive in New Mexico by evening. Their vehicle, a blue Honda Accord, was found abandoned on Interstate 40 near the Texas-New Mexico border, under circumstances remarkably similar to Bobby and Sarah's case. Like Bobby's truck, the Martinez vehicle was found with the engine running, keys in the ignition, and the driver's door open. Carlos's wallet was missing, but Elena's purse remained in the car with her identification and money intact. Most heartbreakingly, Sophia's backpack was still on the back seat, containing coloring books and toys she had brought for the long drive. The family had simply vanished without a trace. The investigation into the Martinez disappearance had followed a similar pattern to Bobby and Sarah's case. Extensive searches found no trace of the family, and no credible witnesses came forward with information about what had happened to them. The case had received less media attention than the Newlyweds' disappearance, partly because it occurred during a busy news period, and partly because the family was not as well connected in their community. When investigators re-examined the Martinez case in light of the evidence against Hartley, disturbing parallels emerged. The location where their car was found was only 30 miles from where Bobby's truck would be discovered 9 months later. The positioning of the vehicle and the pattern of missing items suggested the same perpetrator. Most significantly, among Hartley's possessions, investigators found a child's bracelet with the name Sophia engraved on it. The discovery of Sophia's bracelet was devastating for the Martinez family's surviving relatives. Elena's sister, Maria Sandoval, had spent 26 years wondering what had happened to her sister's family, organizing searches and keeping their memory alive through an annual memorial mass. The confirmation that they had likely been victims of the same predator who killed Bobby and Sarah brought some measure of closure, but it also intensified the grief of knowing that an 8-year-old child had been among Hartley's victims. Another case that investigators connected to Hartley involved a young couple from Arkansas, David and Rebecca Thompson, who had disappeared in March 1999 while traveling to California. Their car was found abandoned near Flagstaff, Arizona, along Interstate 40 following the same pattern as the other cases. David's wallet was missing, Rebecca's purse remained, and there were no signs of mechanical problems with their vehicle. The Thompson case had been particularly puzzling because the couple had no connection to Arizona and no reason to stop in the remote area where their car was found. They were both graduate students at the University of Arkansas, responsible and safety-conscious individuals who maintained regular contact with their families during travel. Their disappearance had been especially traumatic for their families because it occurred just 6 months before their planned wedding. Among Hartley's possessions, investigators found a University of Arkansas keychain and a small jewelry box containing engagement and wedding rings that Rebecca's family identified as belonging to her. The rings had been gifts from her grandmother, unique pieces that could not be easily mistaken for similar items. The discovery confirmed that Rebecca and David had indeed been victims of the same predator, adding another tragic chapter to Hartley's criminal history. The investigation also revealed connections to several other unsolved highway disappearances throughout the Southwest. In each case, the pattern was consistent: vehicles found abandoned with engines running, selective theft of items, and the complete disappearance of the occupants. The cases spanned from 1997 to 2000, suggesting that Hartley had been operating as a serial killer for at least 3 years before his arrest for the lesser charges that eventually led to his imprisonment. One particularly disturbing discovery was evidence that Hartley had been escalating his methods over time. The earlier cases involved primarily adults, but the inclusion of 8-year-old Sofia Martinez suggested that he had become less discriminating in his victim selection. FBI profilers noted that this escalation was typical of serial predators, who often become bolder and more reckless as they gain confidence in their ability to avoid detection. The geographic scope of Hartley's crimes was also significant. The connected cases stretched across 5 states, demonstrating his mobility and his sophisticated understanding of jurisdictional boundaries. By operating across state lines and in remote areas, he had made it difficult for law enforcement agencies to recognize patterns and coordinate their investigations effectively. The revelation of this broader pattern of crimes prompted a comprehensive review of cold cases throughout the region. The FBI established a task force specifically dedicated to examining unsolved disappearances along major highway corridors, using the Hartley case as a template for identifying similar predators who might still be operating. This task force identified several other individuals who had used similar methods, including impersonation of law enforcement officers, to target highway travelers. While none had operated on the same scale as Hartley, the investigation revealed that fake police officer scams were more common than previously realized, particularly in rural areas where legitimate law enforcement presence was limited. The discoveries also led to changes in how law enforcement agencies shared information about crimes occurring along interstate highways. A new database was created to track incidents involving abandoned vehicles, missing persons cases near highways, and reports of suspicious individuals impersonating police officers. This system was designed to help investigators identify patterns more quickly and coordinate responses across jurisdictional boundaries. The psychological profiles developed for Hartley and similar predators became valuable tools for training law enforcement officers to recognize signs of fake police officer scams. These profiles emphasized the sophisticated nature of such criminals, who often invested significant time and money in creating convincing disguises, and who possessed detailed knowledge of police procedures and equipment. The investigation into Hartley's connected crimes also revealed the importance of victim advocacy and family support services. Many of the families whose loved ones had been identified as Hartley's victims had struggled for decades without answers, receiving limited support from overwhelmed law enforcement agencies. The breakthrough in these cases highlighted the need for better resources and support systems for families dealing with unexplained disappearances. As investigators worked to connect additional cases to Hartley, they discovered evidence suggesting that he might have been responsible for even more crimes than initially suspected. His detailed journals and maps indicated familiarity with highway routes and remote locations throughout a much larger geographic area, raising the possibility that there were additional victims whose cases had not yet been identified or properly investigated. The scope of Hartley's crimes also raised questions about how he had been able to operate undetected for so long. His ability to acquire legitimate-looking police equipment, his knowledge of law enforcement procedures, and his careful selection of remote crime scenes had allowed him to avoid detection, despite committing crimes across multiple states over several years. The investigation revealed that Hartley had taken advantage of communication and coordination gaps between law enforcement agencies, particularly in rural areas where resources were limited, and cases involving transient victims might not receive the attention they deserved. His crimes highlighted the need for better information sharing and coordination between agencies investigating similar cases in different jurisdictions. The investigation also highlighted the importance of technology in solving cold cases. The dash camera footage that broke the case open had been recorded in 1999, but had gone unexamined for 25 years simply because its existence was unknown to investigators. The case served as a reminder that evidence can emerge from unexpected sources, even decades after a crime has occurred. Law enforcement agencies used the case to emphasize the dangers of isolated highway travel and the importance of being cautious when approached by anyone claiming to be a police officer. They reminded the public that legitimate law enforcement officers would never ask motorists to leave their vehicles and get into unmarked cars, especially in remote locations. The story of Bobby and Sarah Clark became a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities that exist on America's highways, but it also demonstrated the persistence and dedication of investigators who never gave up on finding the truth. Detective Santos, who had worked the case for 25 years, finally retired knowing that she had helped bring closure to one of the most challenging investigations of her career. In July 2024, exactly 25 years after their disappearance, a memorial service was held for Bobby and Sarah Clark. Friends and family members gathered to remember the young couple whose lives had been cut short, just as they were beginning their journey together. The service included the planting of 2 oak trees along a quiet stretch of highway near Amarillo, creating a living memorial that would grow and endure long after those who remembered the couple were gone. The case of the newlywed bride who disappeared on Interstate 40 serves as a powerful reminder that justice can prevail even when it seems hopeless, that technology can unlock secrets from the past, and that the dedication of investigators and the passage of time can sometimes combine to reveal truths that seemed lost forever. It also reminds us of the precious nature of life and love, and how quickly both can be taken away by those who choose to prey upon innocent people. Bobby and Sarah's story, while tragic, ultimately became a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of preserving evidence, and the way that modern technology can breathe new life into cold cases. Their memory lives on not only in the hearts of those who loved them, but in the lessons their case taught about highway safety, criminal investigation, and the importance of never giving up hope that the truth will eventually emerge. The dash camera that captured those crucial moments in 1999 had been forgotten in a garage for 25 years, but its recordings ultimately provided the key to solving one of Texas's most perplexing disappearances. In doing so, it reminded everyone involved that sometimes the most important evidence is hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it to light. Today, Interstate 40 continues to carry thousands of travelers safely to their destinations every day. But for those who remember Bobby and Sarah Clark, that particular stretch of highway will always serve as a reminder of 2 young people whose love story was cut short, and whose case ultimately helped make the highway safer for everyone who travels them. The investigation remains technically open, as authorities continue to search for the couple's remains and explore connections to other unsolved cases. But for their families and friends, the most important questions have finally been answered. Bobby and Sarah Clark did not simply vanish into the night. They were victims of a violent criminal who targeted vulnerable travelers, and thanks to a forgotten piece of technology and the dedication of investigators who never gave up, their story has finally been told. The legacy of Bobby and Sarah's case extends far beyond the resolution of their specific disappearance. Their story has become a catalyst for significant changes in highway safety awareness, law enforcement procedures, and victim advocacy services throughout the Southwest and beyond. One of the most significant outcomes has been the implementation of enhanced communication systems between law enforcement agencies across state lines. The difficulties that investigators faced in connecting Hartley's crimes across multiple jurisdictions led to the development of new protocols for sharing information about highway crimes, missing persons cases, and suspicious activities involving individuals impersonating law enforcement officers. The National Highway Safety Administration used Bobby and Sarah's case, along with similar incidents, to develop comprehensive safety guidelines for interstate travelers. These guidelines include recommendations for verifying the legitimacy of law enforcement stops, particularly in remote areas, and procedures for reporting suspicious encounters with individuals claiming to be police officers. Educational programs based on the case have been implemented in driving schools, college orientation programs, and community safety workshops throughout the region. These programs teach travelers to be aware of the tactics used by criminals who impersonate law enforcement officers, how to verify the legitimacy of police stops, and the importance of maintaining communication with family members during travel. The technological aspects of the case have also had lasting impact. The dash camera footage that ultimately solved the mystery highlighted the importance of preserving and examining all potential sources of evidence, no matter how unlikely they might seem. Law enforcement agencies have since implemented more comprehensive procedures for identifying and securing digital evidence, including surveillance footage from businesses, traffic cameras, and personal recording devices. The case has become a standard example in forensic science and criminal investigation courses, demonstrating how cold cases can be solved through persistence, technological advancement, and comprehensive evidence review. The combination of traditional detective work and modern forensic techniques that led to Hartley's identification has been studied and replicated in other challenging investigations. Victim advocacy services have also been transformed by lessons learned from the families affected by Hartley's crimes. The Henderson family's experience navigating the uncertainty of their daughter's disappearance highlighted the need for specialized support services for families dealing with missing persons cases. New programs have been established to provide counseling, practical assistance, and advocacy for families facing similar situations. The memorial efforts honoring Bobby and Sarah have evolved into a broader movement supporting highway safety and victim advocacy. The scholarship fund established in their names has grown into a foundation that supports not only educational opportunities, but also research into highway safety and victim services. The foundation has funded studies on travel safety, supported technological innovations in vehicle tracking and communication, and provided grants for victim advocacy programs. The annual memorial service has become a regional gathering that brings together families affected by highway violence, law enforcement officers, victim advocates, and community members committed to preventing similar tragedies. The event serves both as a remembrance of those who have been lost and as an educational opportunity to promote safety awareness and community vigilance. The church where Bobby and Sarah were married has become an informal pilgrimage site for other families dealing with unexplained disappearances. Pastor Williams and the congregation have developed specialized ministries focused on supporting families in crisis, providing both spiritual guidance and practical assistance during their most difficult times. The church's response to tragedy has become a model for other faith communities facing similar challenges. The impact on law enforcement training has been particularly significant. The case is now used in training programs for police officers, FBI agents, and other law enforcement professionals to illustrate the importance of thorough evidence preservation, interagency cooperation, and persistence in cold case investigations. The techniques used to identify and profile Hartley have been incorporated into standard procedures for investigating similar crimes. The broader law enforcement community has also learned important lessons about the sophistication of criminals who impersonate police officers. Training programs now emphasize the need for officers to be aware of individuals who might be studying their procedures and equipment for criminal purposes. Enhanced security measures have been implemented to prevent the theft of police equipment and to better track the sale of items that could be used to impersonate law enforcement officers. The psychological impact of the case has also contributed to advances in understanding and treating trauma related to ambiguous loss. The unique challenges faced by families dealing with unexplained disappearances have been studied by mental health professionals, leading to improved therapeutic approaches and support services for this specific type of grief. Research institutions have used Bobby and Sarah's case as a foundation for studying highway safety, predatory behavior, and the effectiveness of various investigative techniques. The comprehensive documentation of the investigation, from the initial disappearance through the final resolution, has provided valuable data for researchers studying similar cases and developing prevention strategies. The media coverage of the case has also evolved to serve educational purposes. Rather than simply reporting on the sensational aspects of the story, journalists have used the case to explore broader issues of highway safety, the challenges of investigating crimes across jurisdictions, and the importance of community support for victims' families. This approach has helped raise awareness about these issues while respecting the dignity of the victims and their families. The international law enforcement community has also taken notice of the case, particularly the role that digital evidence played in its resolution. The dash camera footage that broke the case open has become an example used in training programs around the world, demonstrating how seemingly insignificant pieces of technology can preserve crucial evidence for decades. The case has also influenced policy discussions about highway safety infrastructure. The remote location where Bobby and Sarah encountered Hartley highlighted the vulnerability of travelers in areas with limited law enforcement presence and poor cellular coverage. These observations have contributed to discussions about improving communication infrastructure along major highway corridors and enhancing patrol coverage in isolated areas. Legal scholars have studied the case as an example of how evidence laws and investigative procedures must adapt to new technologies. The challenge of authenticating and presenting decades-old digital evidence in court has provided valuable lessons for legal professionals dealing with similar cases. The story of Bobby and Sarah Clark has ultimately become more than just a true crime case. It has evolved into a comprehensive example of how communities, law enforcement agencies, and society as a whole can respond to tragedy in ways that honor victims while working to prevent future crimes. Their legacy lives on not only in the memories of those who loved them, but in the concrete improvements to safety, investigation techniques, and victim services that their case has inspired. The dash camera that sat forgotten in Harold Mitchell's garage for 25 years serves as a powerful metaphor for the way that answers can be hidden in unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The technology that captured those crucial moments in 1999 was primitive by today's standards, but it proved sufficient to finally bring justice and closure to a case that had seemed hopeless. As travelers continue to use Interstate 40 and other major highways throughout the Southwest, they benefit from the safety improvements, enhanced law enforcement procedures, and increased awareness that resulted from Bobby and Sarah's tragic story. Their deaths were not in vain if they have helped prevent similar tragedies from befalling other innocent travelers. The enduring message of Bobby and Sarah's story is one of hope, persistence, and the power of community. While evil exists in the world and can strike without warning, the response to their disappearance demonstrated the best of human nature, the willingness to search tirelessly for the missing, to support those who are grieving, to learn from tragedy, and to work together to create a safer world for everyone. Their wedding rings, separated by violence but ultimately reunited through justice, serve as symbols of love that transcends death and of the truth that will eventually emerge no matter how long it takes. Bobby and Sarah Clark's love story, though cut short by violence, continues to inspire those who believe in justice, perseverance, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil.